Question 1. The testes are connected to their original position in the abdomen by that option A says seminal ducts, option B says ejaculatory ducts, option C says spermatic ducts, and option D says vasa recta. Now, testes are originally found in the during the fetal life in the abdomen, but they descend down in the scrotal sacs by the spermatic cord, that is spermatic ducts. So option C is correct. So question 2. Testes are intra-abdominal in the embryonic condition but descend down in the scrotal sacs. Option A says just before the birth. Option B says at puberty. Option C says in the 6th month of the pregnancy. And option D says in the 6th years of age. Now testes are originally found in the lumbar region during the fetal life, but it descend down just before the birth. At around 7 to 8 month. This option A gives us right answer. So question 3 is one of the following cells secretes the hormone. Option A says cells of Leydig, option B says cells of Sertoli, C is primary spermatocyst, and D is secondary spermatocyte. So if we see the TS of testes, then we can see the large bundle of seminiferous tubules, and in between that there's a cells of Leydig which is present. Now in the seminiferous tubules we can see the Sertoli cells are present, which just keeps the sperm cells to bind to it. Okay, and the Leydig cells which is responsible in the production of hormone which is known as testosterone. So option A is correct. Question 4 is which one of the function is not performed by the epididymis? A says it stores sperms before the ejaculation. B, it matures the sperm. C, it gives nourishment to the sperms. And D, it secretes the less quantity of semen. Now if we see that testes which is present on the both side of the urethra, the epididymis is present above the testes. Now it performs all the three functions that it says. It stores the sperms before ejaculation, before it just attached to the testes. So it helps in the ejaculation of sperms. So option A is incorrect. It matures the sperm. That sperm is for some time mature in the epididymis. So that option B is also incorrect. It gives the nourishment to the sperms. Yeah, because it secretes the fructose which gives nourishment to the sperm. So option C is also incorrect. D option, it secretes the less quantity of semen. The secretion of semen is performed by the seminal vesicle. So epididymis is not doing that function. So correct option is D. Question 5. Which one of the following part of male reproductive system is not paired? Now if we take as a reference the urethra, that is middle region, then option A, testes which are present on the both side of the urethra. Epididymis is just attached to the testes, hence they are present in the pair. Vasa deferentia, which are the ducts which leads the sperms to the urethra. So option A, testes, option B, epididymis, and option C, vasa deferentia. They are present in the pair, but only urethra is a single and common route for the excretion of sperms or semen and the urine. So option D is correct. Question 6. A donut spherical gland present below urinary bladder and around the proximal portion of the urethra. Option A says seminiferous gland, option B says seminal gland, option C says proximal gland, and option D says bulbourethral gland. Now if we refer the human male reproductive system of a, then we can see that seminiferous gland, option is incorrect. Option B, seminal gland, which is also incorrect. Option C, prostate gland, which is the donut shaped gland just below the urinary bladder. You can see a donut type large gland is present, which is known as prostate gland. So option C is correct. Question 7. Both ejaculatory ducts open into urethra within, option A says urinary bladder, option B says prostate gland, option C says Cooper's gland, and option D says Bartholin's gland. Again, if we take if we refer the human male reproductive system, then there are the testes which are present on the both side of the urethra, the epididymis which takes the sperms from the testes, and through the vasa deferentia the sperms travel first into the prostate gland, and in the prostate gland which is mixed with the semen and go into the urethra. So option B is correct, that both ejaculate ducts open into the urethra within the prostate gland. Question 8. Whose among the following secretion provide the frictionless movement of the penis in the vagina during the sexual intercourse? Option A says seminal vesicle, option B says prostate gland, option C says Bartholin's gland, and option D says bulbourethral gland. Now, when the sperm is produced in the testes, which is leads by epididymis via vas deferentia to the seminal vesicle and prostate gland. Now when the semen is formed, urethra, there are two glands which secretes an alkaline viscous fluid. When it gets mixed with the semen, it acts as a lubricant, which helps to clear the acidic condition in the vagina during the sexual intercourse, and hence the option D, that is bulbourethral gland, nothing but Cooper's gland, which is the correct option. Question 9. Each lobule in the testes consists of one or three coiled tubules known as, option A says seminal tubule, option B says seminiferous tubules, option C says testicular tubules, and option D says spermatic tubules. Now if we see the diagram of TS of testes, then there are bundles of cells which are known as seminiferous tubules in the number of around 1 to 3. So option B is correct. Question 10. In human, processes of spermatogenesis is completed in, option A 54 days, option B 64 days, option C 74 days, and option D is 84 days. Now first of all, what is spermatogenesis? Spermatogenesis is a process of formation of male gametophytic cell, that is spermatozoa. Now first, the primitive cell or the primordial cell which undergoes mitosis and forms two cells. Those two cells again go under the mitosis, which is equational division, and form the four cells. Now one of these four cells undergoes growth phase, that it grows in size, and then it undergoes meiosis, which is the reductional division, that is we get four spermatozoa from the one primordial cell. This whole lot of process takes the time, and the option C 74 days is correct. Question 11. Body of a penis in a human is composed of, option A 3 columns of erectile tissue, Option B, 2 columns of erectile tissue. Option C, 5 columns of erectile tissue. And option D, only 1 column of erectile tissue. Now if we see, the penis is a copulatory organ, the urethra situated in it. It acts as a penis is a copulatory organ of a male reproductive system, which is consisted of 3 columns of erectile tissue, naming erectile tissue, corpora cavernosa, and medium corpus spongium. So there are total 3 columns of erectile tissue. Hence option A is correct. Question 12. Sertoli cells in the seminiferous tubules perform following all the function except A. Nourishment to the spermatozoa, B. Support to the developing sperms, C. Protection to the developing sperms, and production of the male gametophyte spermatozoa. Again, if we see the TAS of the testicles, there are seminiferous tubules, and in those seminiferous tubules there are the Sertoli cells. Now Sertoli cells, what they do is, the head of the sperm is attached to the Sertoli cells. It acts as a nourisher cells, that it gives the nourishment to the spermatozoa. It again support to the developing sperms, that it holds the head of the sperm cells. See, the protection of the developing cells or developing sperm cells. The production of the male gametophyte is done by the cuboidal germ cell, which are present on the lining of the seminiferous tubules. Hence, Sertoli cells perform all the functions except the D, which is production of male gametophytic spermatozoa. Question 13. What is not true about the bulbourethral gland in the male? Option A says these are the also known as Cooper's gland. Option B, these are placed one on either side of the urethra. Option C says these cells secrete mucus, contribute to 1% of the semen. And option D says these cells secrete an anticoagulant to prevent the coagulation. Now one by one, if we go through the options, so option A says these are the also known as Cooper's gland, which we all know that Cooper's gland is also known as bulbourethral gland, and they are placed on the either side of the urethra. So option A and B are not qualified. So option C says these cells secrete the mucus, which contribute 1% of the semen. Yeah, the Cooper's gland secretes the mucus, which is alkaline viscous fluid, which helps in the semen to lubricate the vagina. So only option left with us is option D, that this cells secrete an anticoagulant to prevent the coagulation, which is correct. Question 14. Seminiferous tubule in the testes are internally linked by option A, columnar germinal epithelium, option B, glandular germinal epithelium, option C, cuboidal germinal epithelium, and option D is ciliated germinal epithelium. Again, if you see the diagram of TS of testes, seminiferous tubules includes of Sertoli cells and a number of cuboidal germinal. Question 14. Seminiferous tubule in the testes are internally linked by option A says columnar germinal epithelium, option B says glandular germinal epithelium, option C says cuboidal germinal epithelium, and option D says ciliated germinal epithelium. Again, if you see the diagram of TS of testes, it consists of a lobule called seminiferous tubules. It consists of again Sertoli cells, which may look like ciliated cells, but again the germ cells are present in the cuboidal form. So seminiferous tubule are internally linked by cuboidal germinal epithelium. So option C is correct. Question 15. Identify the correct matches. So accessory gland and their function, we have to match them. So column A is seminal vesicle, prostate gland, and Cooper's gland. The functions is lubricant vagina, provide energy and coagulation of sperm. C says neutralizes the acidity of vagina. Now seminal vesicle perform the function of providing energy to the sperm and coagulation of sperm. So for the first seminal vesicle, option B is correct. Now if we look at all the 4 options, there is no B for the first first option, there is no B in other three options. So ultimately we go for the option A, which is correct. So ultimately we get all the second option, that is prostate gland, which says C. Prostate gland neutralizes the acidity of vagina and Cooper's gland lubricates the vagina. So option A is correct. Question 16. Testes are extra-abdominal in the position. Which of the following is the most appropriate reason? A says narrow pelvis in male. B says special protection for testes. C says prostate gland and seminal vesicle occupy the maximum space. And option D says 2 to 2.5 degrees Celsius lower than the normal body temperature. Now we all know that during fetal time, the testes are found in the abdomen, but they descend down in extra-abdominal cavity called scrotal sacs. Now testes are located in the scrotal sac, that is outside the abdominal cavity. So reason for that, basically testes perform the functions like nourishment of sperm, and development and production of sperms. So to perform all such activities, the testes needs the temperature which is slightly lower than the body temperature. Hence option D, which stays 2 to 2.5 degrees Celsius lower than the normal body temperature, which is our correct answer. Question 17. Scrotum which hang outside in which testes are cooled by? Option A says normal body temperature. Option B says outside air. Option C says hypothalamus of brain. And option D, thyroid gland in neck. Now we all know that testes are located outside in the scrotal sacs, outside the abdominal cavities. Now body always try to maintain the temperature of 37 degrees Celsius, so which is not compatible for the testes. Hence if it is remain inside the body, the testes will not be able to maintain the temperature slightly lesser than the body temperature. Hence if it remains outside, it gets cooled by the outside air. So option B is correct. Question 18. Fallopian tubes are internally lined by? Option S is columnar and ciliated epithelium. Option B says columnar and cuboidal epithelium. Option C says non-striated muscles and ciliated epithelium. And option D says cuboidal and glandular epithelium. Now fallopian tubes are the structure which conducts the ovum to the uterus. So the lining of a fallopian tube, that is, in other words, is known as oviduct. So these are internally lined by the columnar and ciliated epithelium. Now ciliated epithelium is for this reason, because to carry the ovum to the uterus, it needs some movements. So ciliated epithelium provides that movement and lubricates the movement of ovum. So option A is correct. Question 19. Infundibulum of oviduct opens into the abdominal cavity by an aperture called? Option A says osculum, option B says ostium, option C says gonopore, and option D says oviducal funnel. Now if you see the diagram of human female reproductive system, then there is a fimbriae, which is finger-like projection. Above that, infundibulum, and then it opens into oviduct, that is our fallopian tube. Now fimbriae has an opening aperture to the abdominal cavity known as ostium. So option B is correct. Question 20. A small erectile organ, clitoris, lies at anterior anterior junction of the labia minora. Option B says posterior junction of labia majora. Option C says anterior junction of labia majora, and option D says posterior junction of labia minora. Now clitoris is a small organ which is part of a female reproductive system. Now if we see the vertical section of the opening of the female reproductive system, then there are twofold. One is labia minora, and just above that a small organ which is just project outside or in front to the openings. This organ is known as clitoris. It is just present anterior to the labia minora. So we go with option A, that is anterior junction of labia minora. Question 21. A mature Graafian follicle shows a large eccentric cavity called A says blastocele, B says antrum, C says cumulus orifice, and D says follicula. Now if we see the TS of an ovary, then first of all the germ cell starts developing, that is we called it as primordial cells, and then it goes on developing, that is germ cells begin to grow from one side and the other side of the follicle. The secretion of fluid starts. Hence the secretion of fluid that is take place in a cavity which is known as antrum, and it secretes the antral fluid. So option B, antrum, is correct. A mature Graafian follicle shows a large eccentric cavity called antrum. Question 22. Internally Graafian follicle shows a group of cells in the which ovum is situated called, option A says zona pellucida, option B says corona radiata, option C says discus prodigius, option D says membrana granulosa. Now when in an ovary the Graafian follicle fully matures and releases the ovum, the ovum is consisted of two outer layers, that is one is zona pellucida and other one is outer corona radiata. So these two layers are found in the matured ovum. So these two layers are eliminated, that these two options are eliminated from our question. We only left with the C and D. Membrana granulosa is an internal cuboidal lining which is present in an ovary. So this option is also we take off. Only option we left is option C, that is discus prodigius. So internally Graafian follicle shows a group of cells in which ovum is situated is discus prodigius. Question 23. Vagina is a fibromuscular tube internally lined by, option A says fibrous connective tissue, option B says keratinized stratified columnar epithelium, option C says keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, and option D says non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. If we see the structure of vagina, now vagina is a passage for the sexual intercourse. So when penis get inside the vaginal cells, it has to continuously undergo contraction and relaxation, which is only possible due to the stratified squamous epithelium. So option C, we will go with option C, that is keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Question 24. Hymen is a fold of mucous membrane which closes the vaginal opening at, option A says upper end of vagina, option B says lower end of vagina, Option C says upper end of urethral orifice. Option D says lower end of urethral orifice. Now again, if we see the vertical section of female reproductive system, then there are urethral opening and vaginal opening. So at the lower end of vaginal opening, hymen, which is a thin layer of mucous membrane, is present. So we'll go with option B, that is, it is present at the lower end of vagina. Question 25. In ovulation, ovum released from the ovary in option A says infundibulum of oviduct, option B says ovary medulla, option C says abdominal cavity, and option D says femore around the infundibulum. Now again, the ovulation, which is the process of release of ovary from the process of release of ovum from the ovary. So when ovum is released with certain layers from ovary, it is first goes to the abdominal cavity, and then the femore, which is finger-like projection of the fallopian tube, takes the ovary inside the fallopian tube. So after release from the ovary, ovum first goes to the abdominal cavity and then receives by the femore. So option C is correct, that is ovum released from the ovary in abdominal cavity. Question 26. After ovulation, which part in the ovary is acting as a temporary endocrine gland during the pregnancy? Option A says corpus callosum, option B says corpus luteum, option C says corpus albicans, and option D says mature follicle. Now after ovulation, if suppose the ovum is fused with a sperm cell and turns out into a zygotic cell, then the zygote goes to the uterus and attach to the lining of the uterus. Now there are chances, if the survival of zygote is necessary, the hormone levels must be stabilized. So in order to stabilize the hormone level, there is something called as corpus luteum cells, which consist of inner lining of germinal cells. After release of ovum into it, it secretes the hormone called progesterone, which is necessary for survival of zygotic cells. So after ovulation, corpus luteum is one of the cells which acts as a temporary endocrine gland which functions as secreting progesterone hormone during the pregnancy, which is necessary for the survival of zygote. So hence option B is correct. Question 27. Corpus luteum is formed in ovary immediately after the process of, option A says fertilization, option B says ovulation, option C says blastulation, and option D says implantation. Now again, if you see the TS of ovary and various phases of forming the Graafian follicle, it becomes mature and mature, and ultimately from that Graafian follicle, the ovum, which is secondary oocyte, is released. So the germ cells which are present for the nourishment of ovum still present in that Graafian follicle. So if there are any chances of getting pregnancy, corpus luteum is the cell which has to be there to secrete the progesterone, which is necessary for the survival of zygotic cells, and hence corpus luteum is formed in an ovary immediately after the process of ovulation. Question 28. Pick the odd homologous pair out. Option A says Bartholin's gland and Cooper's gland. Option B says clitoris penis. Option C says mons pubis and glans penis. And option D says labia majora and scrotum. Let's take a look at option A, that is Bartholin's gland and Cooper's gland. That is Bartholin's gland and Cooper's gland, which is present both in the male reproductive system, so this is not odd pair. Clitoris resembles the penis-like structure or the projection which is coming out of a female reproductive system. It's a kind of penis in a female reproductive system, so they are same. Then labia majora and scrotum are the folds present in the labia majora is present in the female reproductive system, which is the fold near the vagina, and scrotum is a structure which holds down the testes in male reproductive system. So mons pubis and glans penis are the odd homologous pair, so we'll go with option C. Question 29. Formation of ova in the ovary from the cells in the egg nest by the series of phases called as option A says ovulation, option D says oogenesis, option C says oocytogenesis, and option D says oophorectonomy. Now formation of ova in the ovary is certain kind of a thing which is called as oogenesis, because ova is a primary cell of a female reproductive system. Again, if we take a look at oogenesis, which is the process of formation of ova from the ovary, is a similar kind of thing which we seen in the male reproductive system, that is formation of spermatozoan cells by the spermatogenesis. Then first primordial cells undergoes mitosis, forms the oogonium cells. Now there are lot of cells, but I am showing one only, so results into oogonium. It undergoes, one of the oogonium cells undergoes the growth phase that secretes the mass Now this secondary oocytes again give rise to the one main cells which is known as ovum, which has the nucleus of female reproductive system, and other three polar bodies which is degenerated after some time. So formation of ova in the ovary from the cells in the egg nest by the series of phases are called as oogenesis. Question 30. Which of the following change is not associated with the bleeding phase? Let's go through the option one by one. So option A says corpus luteum gets degenerated. Now during the menstruation phase, that is bleeding phase, corpus luteum, if gets degenerated, it happens, the corpus luteum gets degenerated and thrown out of the vagina during the bleeding phase. Second, endometrium of uterus is ruptured. This is the main endometrium of the uterus is ruptured during the bleeding phase, and all the blood sinuses which is attached to the uterus are flown off. Option C is this level of FSH, that is follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, that is luteinizing hormone, below low. So I think this statement is not true, because during the menstruation phase, that is bleeding phase, level of FSH becomes, or it remains the stable, and level of LH is rise a little bit. So hence from my point of view, option C is correct. That is this change, that is level of FSH and LH below low, which is not incorrect. Question 31. cyclic changes in the endometrium of uterus and ovary during the menstrual cycle controlled by the hormones secreted by. Now option A says uterus and ovary during the menstrual phase. Now in the menstrual phase, that is bleeding phase, all the bleeding sinuses present in the or attached to the uterus are flown off. So option A is wrong because uterus does not secrete any hormone. Option B says pituitary gland and thyroid gland. Now pituitary gland secretes certain hormones, but thyroid gland secretes the oxytocin, which comes into act after the birth of a child, that is after the 9 months from the pregnancy. So this option also incorrect. Option C says anterior pituitary and ovary. Yes, anterior pituitary secretes certain hormones, and ovary also secretes certain hormones called progesterone, which helps in the attachment of the zygote to the uterus. So we'll go with option C, that is anterior pituitary and ovary. Question 32. Increased level of estrogen brings about the repairment of the endometrium of the uterus is called as. Option A says menstruation, option B says proliferation, option C says flocculation, and option D says ovulation. Now during the whole menstrual cycle, the levels of the various hormones keeps on increasing and decreasing. So if we take the first phase, that is menstrual phase, in the menstrual phase the levels of the all the hormones are becomes low. So after some time, that is at the end of menstrual phase, the some repairment should be done of the uterus, that is endometrium, blood sinuses. So these are done by the hormone called estrogen. So estrogen is a hormone which brings about the repairment of the endometrium of the uterus during the end of the menstrual phase and at the start of the proliferative phase, that is during 5th to the 30th day of menstrual cycle. So we'll go with option B, that is repairment of endometrium of uterus is called as proliferation. Question 33. Egg is surrounded by the follicular cells called as corona radiata, which are glued together by option A says hydrochloric acid, option B says hyaluronic acid, option C says gelatinous material, and option D says glutamic acid. Now, when the egg or the ovum cells is detached or removed out of the ovary, this is the nucleus, and the outer layer of the corona radiata has some acidic property which attracts the sperm which having the alkaline property. So in the acrosome of the sperm, something called as hyaluronidase, which is alkaline in nature, which is gets attracted towards the acidic property of the egg cells. So the follicular cells on the corona radiata are glued together by hyaluronic acid. Question 34. The path followed by the sperm in the ooplasm to run towards the ovum nucleus is called as. Option A says penetration path, option B says copulation path, option C says fertilization path, and option D says proliferation path. Now, when the egg is released from the ovary, it comes into fallopian tube, that is oviduct, and suppose in the same time the copulation occurs, that is penis penetrates with the vagina, it will releases the sperms into the vagina, and then there is a mutual attraction between the sperm cell and nucleus of egg cells. So sperm cells keep running towards the nucleus of a female nuclear cell. So the path which it follows is known as copulation path. Question 35. Meaning of a fertilization membrane. A says zona pellucida becomes thick after fertilization. Option B says vitelline membrane becomes thick after the fertilization. Option C says corona radiata glued by the hyaluronic acid. Option D says conversion of vitelline membrane into zona pellucida. Now, when the sperms cell get penetrates with the egg cells, just because the zona pellucida consists of something called as anti-fertilizing, which attracts the fertilizing of the sperm cells. Now, when one of the sperm get penetrates and got the entry into the egg cell, all the anti-fertilizing membrane, which is nothing but a zona pellucida layer, turns out into the fertilizing membrane, which repels all the other sperms to get enters into the egg cells, and hence only one sperm cells can penetrate into the egg cells. So zona pellucida layer becomes thick after the fertilization. So we'll go with option A.